Hello, this is Silver from Silver Hypnosis, and this is the State of the Channel video. It's been a long time since I've done one of these. Very long time. Longer than normal. And my content has sort of slowed recently, dramatically. Slowed far more than I wanted, and there are good reasons for this, and I'll get into that pretty soon. But before we do that, thank you to everybody who has still supported me, financially and otherwise, who watches my content, who shares my content, who enjoys my content, really anyone who takes the time to listen to what I do. It really does mean a lot, and it helps me because life has gotten difficult, to say the least. Life's not perfect. Been going through a lot of shit lately. Sorry, shouldn't say it like that, but that's kind of how it feels. Been going through a lot of stuff lately. Just like mentally, physically, everything's just sort of So let's back up a little bit. So people are going, why aren't making as much content? And the real reason is that I got a new diagnosis with my doctor, which is a good thing actually because it explains a whole lot. I've talked before in other places that my doctors previously thought that I was just like on the verge of manic depressive, where I just kind of suffer from like depression constantly, and I'm heavily medicated for it. Some people might not like some people might feel like wrong thinking about that or saying that, but I am heavily medicated for my depression. I take the maximum possible dose of my antidepressant every day. They will legally allow me to do so. I'll take anxiety meds because my brain is just a mess. And for a long time, we thought I was manic depressive, that I had, because it runs in my family, and we have, certain issues and other things like that. And then, ironically, somebody else in my family ended up getting married, and they have a family member who is autistic, specifically has Asperger's, and that got the rest of my family learning about what Asperger's is, because before that they didn't know, and I didn't know. And after meeting them and doing some research and learning about, background, and suddenly my parents are like, that sounds a whole lot like you. And I was like, no, that's not me. I don't think so. I mean, I'm like, 27? I think I would have known at this point if I was, autistic, because I'm 27 years old. And then I started doing research, and I started looking into it, and I started thinking back and talking with family members about how I was before I can remember how I was. Things that I did, even things that I knew and still remember, and things that I still do. And I was like, that sounds a whole lot like me. So I went to my doctor. My doctor's like, well, okay. Well, it's a little odd because you're 27. Most people figured this out before you're 27. I'm like, yeah, I know. But considering I lived in a house, my dad wouldn't even let me get tested for ADHD, when I was a kid. But just doing things when I was a kid, doing things like I always did my homework, and I would never turn it in. I don't know why I would never turn it in. I just never did. Got in trouble a whole lot for that, because they'd be like, why aren't you doing your homework? I'm like, but I did do my homework. I just never turned in. Having problems listening, or not really having problems listening. You listen, you just have problems processing information. Hyper obsessive about certain things, and only a few topics. I was very, very good with certain things, like history, for example. I've mentioned I had a history degree. Very good with specific information, but very bad memory. Another thing I have. Very specific things like that I always chalked up to me either being depressed or having ADD, or in some cases, the fact that I'm missing one of my senses. I'm missing my sense of smell and most of my sense of taste. So I just assumed most things just didn't make sense because I'm unable to fully understand them and articulate them the way most people do. I don't experience the world as most people do. Um, but I was talking to my doctor, and the doctor's like, all right, well, they got this, this test, basically, among other things, where they rate you out of 50, basically, and anything over a 30 has a high likelihood that you might be autistic in some way, shape, or form. It's a big spectrum. I scored a 38, so that's pretty very definitive, but at the same time, most of the other things sort of plays into that, and this sort of is where it gets to my work, where talking with other hypnotists and other things, I'm often struck by the fact that I am probably one of the more meticulous, detail-oriented, some would say obsessive, with my work, because I script everything. And I write long, long scripts where I plan out every word and wherein I make sure every sentence, every phrase, every inflection of my voice all has a point to it. And talking with other hypnotists, and I talk to a fair deal of them on YouTube and other places, this is not normal. In fact, I tend to write. I tend to be way over obsessive with details. Now, on some level, that's a good thing for my work. My work, I think, as a result, is very good. I like to think that when I do produce work, that it's better because I do all that work and scripting and everything else. And that's good, except it again, this is the Asperger's talking, where I have a certain problem where I can't work on multiple scripts at once, and normally I write all of my scripts, no matter how long it is, in one day. So generally, when people see a file, what they're seeing is the result of one day where I scripted a 20 to 30 page script and then recorded and uploaded it the same day, which is crazy. But this sort of is partially why I've been struggling lately, is because about month and a half ago, I think it was about a month and a half, I was like, oh, I'm gonna take commissions, and I got a whole bunch of commissions from people, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do them. Here's the only problem with that. I find it very hard to just do like files on request. I tend to obsess over certain topics and then not do them for a long time and then re-obsess over them, and so it's very hard for me to just do things on request. It's very hard for people to just go, make me this, and for me to go, okay, and do it. When people request things that sort of fit within, when people request things that are in whatever I'm focused on at the time, it's very easy, but part of the problem is that I took all these commissions because, again, I do most of my work based on requests from viewers and listeners and everything else. I use the feedback people give me to come up with new ideas and use the ideas they suggest to turn those into files. So I took all these requests and I was like, oh man, and I couldn't prioritize them. And so every time I wanted to do one, I would just shut down because I couldn't, because I'm like, oh god, I can't do this one, because if I do this one, I'm not doing the other one, and maybe they'll be mad about it. And, things like that. And then I'm like, well, I can't produce, my free files, because if I produce those, then the people who paid me to do these files are going to be really unhappy. And so basically I ended up doing nothing. Basically just shut down mentally and did nothing for a very long time, for days on end. I started sleeping like 18 hours a day. And the biggest problem with sleeping 18 hours a day is not that you're sleeping 18 hours a day. The problem with sleeping 18 hours a day is that you don't eat, and then you feel awful when you wake up, and then you immediately go back to sleep, and then you also feel awful because your body is starving. So essentially for the last month or so, I would say maybe even a month and a half, beginning of May, I've sort of been in this cycle of sleeping a lot, not eating, starving, and being miserable. which sucks for obvious reasons. But so anyway, all of these things where I can sort of look into why I am the way I am. So now that I've seen my doctor, and my doctor goes, yeah, that sounds like what you're on. I can sort of change up my medication, hopefully. And those of you who know, I've been changing my medication and the dosages recently, within the last year or so. But, now I'm sort of trying to learn, like, new ways to, like, adapt so that I'm more productive and actually, like, accomplish things. Because one of my biggest problems is I'm very bad at, like, I wouldn't say getting work done, because I can work very hard and very well when I have the idea in my head to do it. My biggest problem has always been that I get overwhelmed easily, and I'm not good at prioritizing things. I can only handle like 2 or 3 things, and then I'm just lost. Like, people who give me like a list of things, and they'll say, do these like 10 things, and by the time they've gotten to number 5, I've forgotten what number 1 is. And that's just how my brain works. And so it's been difficult because, on one hand, it's a blessing in disguise because the difficulty has caused me to realize that I have Asperger's and realize that I'm autistic, because I wouldn't have known that otherwise. Like, I wouldn't have gone to my doctor and thought about it. But now that I have, I can sort of grasp, sort of better understand things, I suppose. And to be fair, I've lost, I've had, looking back on it, there's a lot of things that, had I known I had this, like, when I was, like, 20, life would have been a little easier before I, dropped out of college the first time, or when I, lost a number of personal relationships, because I have a tendency to try to make things make sense. Things that don't make sense don't work well for me. I'm very bad at things that don't, like, certain things have to be a certain way because they need to make sense in my head. And if they don't make sense, I tend to pursue them and obsess about them until they do make sense. It's another reason why I script everything. It's because if I try to do things without scripting them, I sit there and I go, well, that didn't make sense. And then I end up doing the same bit over and over and over again. So when I write it out, it's easier for me to understand. And so I can look at it and grasp what I'm doing and all of that. But it's sort of, for a long time, sort of became a struggle for me to grasp a lot of things. And it really hurt a lot of my personal relationships because, people will say something. I had this talk, like, with my last girlfriend, actually, where we had this problem where we were doing something, and she said something along the lines of that she wanted to do it for me. You know what I mean? Like, when you're in a relationship, you do things for each other. That's just normal. You know what I mean? Like, even if you don't want to do them, you do them because the other person enjoys them. That part I understand. But I always have a problem with people doing things for me when they're not enjoying them. I don't want people to do things for me if they don't enjoy it. I want people to enjoy it. Because in my mind, if you're having somebody do something for you and they're not enjoying it, to take enjoyment out of that is sadism, and I'm not a sadist. And then, we had this whole argument, this whole to-do, because I couldn't understand why, like, they were upset because I was trying to make it so they were enjoying it too, and they were unhappy with that, and I was confused why they were unhappy with that, because I couldn't understand that they just wanted to do something nice for me. And, we had this whole fight about it, and in the end, because I'm obsessive about certain things and trying to make things make sense, I spent all this time and I essentially questioned the whole reason for the relationship without realizing that that's exactly what I had done. Because I had essentially taken something that was very small, a very small complaint in the grand scheme, and turned it into a giant sort of, like, to do, I made a mountain out of a molehill, to say the least, it almost feels like you're a conspiracy theorist when you realize this kind of thing, or you're sitting down and you're like, wow, I came to the conclusion that the world is flat because a bird flew overhead, it doesn't make sense, and it's not always supposed to make sense. because your brain doesn't work right. You don't realize you're doing it because you're trying to make things make sense. It's like in your head, you're going, this all needs to make sense and be logical, and you're trying to put a piece into something else that it doesn't belong in. And that's sort of how my brain works, where I have a hard time communicating with people because most of the time I have no idea what they're talking about. I have a very hard time understanding people who don't think like I do, which is most people. I'm kind of an odd mind because I want everything to make sense, and I make jumps in logic that don't make sense to other people because my mind is just moving from topic to topic, and I'm connecting dots that no one else is connecting, and that's an issue, obviously. But that comes with, I've always done this, and no one was like, hey, maybe this is a problem, you should probably look into this, until recently, and so now I've been doing that. And so the reason I wanted to speak about this to my audience, I guess, is one, to understand where I've been mentally recently, because I've gotten a few messages like, well, why aren't you producing anything anymore? And I'm like, well, I don't know how to tell you this. Because I just assumed I was depressed. I just assumed that I was basically like a flunky and a useless human being. I just assumed I was a worthless piece of shit, to be honest. And you start getting into the, well, I guess I don't need to be alive, and that kind of thing. And that's a really bad place to be. And I've been there before, don't get me wrong. I was way worse way back when I was a teenager. I was a mess and a wreck. So it does get better, and things do get better. So if you're also dealing with that out there, things get better, and you should totally stick with it, because life does get better. I should probably reinforce that line a lot. Things get better. Especially because you find things you didn't realize you find. But it's sort of one of those things where you have to, like, now that I know what I have, now that I know that I have Asperger's, and now that I know that this is how my brain works, I've started to, like, try to figure out how to fix it. So hopefully that means I'll be producing more content. But one of the major problems that I have is, like, I've never understood what it means to be satisfied or what it means to feel accomplishment. Like, example, I graduated from college, and I felt absolutely nothing. Like, my first reaction when people were like, aren't you happy you graduated from college? I'm like, no, because now I need to find a job and get, and pay off my debt. Like, that was all I thought about. I didn't think about it as if you just hit a life milestone, and you should feel good about the fact that you worked your ass off for 4 years, 6 in my case, and you actually did something, and, you accomplished something. But I didn't feel any of that. I basically just felt empty. Again, that probably should have been a giant clue, but I just assumed it was because I'm a depressive person. And partially I am, but on the other hand, part of the problem is that my brain just doesn't work correctly. And so when I produce files, I often don't feel anything except abject anxiety about my files. And I obsess over things. My hypnotist friends often say that I obsess over analytics way too much, and I probably do. Because I check my analytics constantly. I am looking at, like, all of the analytics for all of my files to figure out what kinds of people listen to me, what your ages are, your genders, when you listen, what platforms you listen on, and I'm constantly trying to figure it out, and I'm making, like, charts and things to, like, better understand what's going on, and, all my fellow creators looking at me and going, just create, and they'll show up. You don't have to, like, you don't need a flow chart to figure out, what people like. The fact that people are supporting you pretty much shows you what you like, but because it's me, because it's the way my brain works, I'm sitting around going, I'm sitting around looking at things going, all this needs to make sense. And really, none of it actually makes sense. I'm sure that the main reason people listen to me is because I've either created something that they like, that my voice is one that they like, that the way I do things is a way they like, or some other emotional response that makes them feel, or that makes them enjoy me over other people for whatever reason. Um, so yeah, that's just sort of like, when you think about it, when I think about it and I go, these are all signs of, you know, hyper focusing on things that I shouldn't be hyper focusing on. My brain does anyway. And, it's so that's kind of where I've been trying to learn, like, how to cope and how to be more productive and how to deal with things and how to fix my life, because it doesn't really feel very good to be, sitting there going, you can't accomplish anything because you're buried under the problems that exist. Does that make sense? Like, you're buried under, like, the weight of, you're buried under the weight of everything, essentially, because, that's just how my brain is, or I'm like, I tend to overthink, and I tend to overdo things, and I tend to overreact to things or not understand things. And so I'm trying to learn to be better at that. And I'm hoping this will result in more work coming from me, and hopefully it's resulting in me being more successful, because obviously producing no content does not do very well when you're trying to make a financial living. It's very hard to make a financial living when you're not producing content, and you're a content creator. But it's also very hard to find and hold down a job when your brain just doesn't work some days. So learning to live with things is part of, like, where I'm at right now. Hopefully I'm going to start making more work again. And hopefully this explains sort of where my brain is at and how I think and how I interact with things. Sort of why I guess when you think about it, another example of things that I thought about were, like, people ask me, they're like, you make all these sexual files, does it bother you? And I'm like, well, no, because it's, in my mind, I don't see them as sexual, I guess. Like, in my mind, I distinguish between something that's erotic, something that's sexual, and something that's sensual. Most people do not make that distinction. But in my mind, I'm like, well, it's not actually erotic, it's just sexual. Or not sexual, it's erotic. Or it's not erotic, it's sensual. And most people do not make that distinction. But in my mind, I'm like, these are three different categories. Things like that. Things that make no sense if you argue them to anyone else. But in my own brain, they make sense. And so I'm trying to figure out a better way to take what's in my brain and better articulate what I'm actually thinking and better understand what everyone else is saying, which is no easy feat, and learning this at 27 is sort of difficult, but better to learn it at 27 than 57, I guess. So yeah, this has gone on too long, but that's where I've been. That's why I haven't been producing content. Content's hopefully going to start being made again pretty soon, hopefully very soon. If you're thinking to yourself, this sounds a lot like me, go talk to your doctor about it, because you might be autistic on somewhere on the spectrum, or you might have Asperger's like I do and didn't know it. And life's a lot easier once you know what the problems are. Take it from me. So, yeah, that's basically it. Thank you for all your support, financially and otherwise. I'm going to try and produce more content, despite the fact that I keep losing money on YouTube because YouTube keeps cutting their ad rates. And a lot of the files I make that are popular don't have ads, because YouTube says that they're not fit for their platform, so I don't get paid for them. So most of my, most of the ones that are like mental domination ones, I don't get paid for, because YouTube just doesn't monetize them, and I can't argue with them about it because they won't bother checking them otherwise. So yeah, that's a problem. Yeah. So yeah, that's basically where I've been, what I've been doing, what I've been thinking. This file's too long, honestly. But yeah, thanks for all the support. Take care of yourselves. Go have your doctor check things out if you ever think like I do and go, man, I don't think my brain works right. Go check out with a doctor. Go do that. Don't be like me and wait 27 years to do so. See y'all later.